I was on the top step of my mother's house when the world stopped behaving like the world. 3 days ago, I would have told you that nothing could take my daughter out of my arms while I was holding her with everything I had in me. I would have said my grip was stronger than gravity itself where she was concerned. I was wrong. At 7:37 in the morning, on Monday, the 8th of June, the ground under Mindanao did something it does maybe once every 50 years. And in less than a minute, my arms were empty. My palms scraped raw against broken wood, and my daughter was somewhere underneath the house I grew up in, buried in the dark, unable to call out for help the way another child could. A few details here have been changed to protect the people I love, my last name, a few small facts about my family, the exact barangay where my mother lives. But the earthquake itself is exactly as it happened. The magnitude, the hour, the province, the number of buildings that came down that morning across the island, all of it is verified public record, and you can look up every piece of it yourself if you don't believe me yet. What happened to me afterward, at the edge of that wreckage, in the dark, waiting for strangers to dig toward my daughter, is the part no camera caught and no news report ever told. I was raised Muslim, and I never once expected that the presence sitting beside me in that darkness would tell me his name was Jesus. That's the part I actually came here to tell you. My name is Amina Tomawis. I am 39 years old. I live in Winnipeg, Canada, in an old apartment building on the west side, but I was born on the coast of Sarangani in Mindanao in a small barangay outside a town called Maasim, where the ocean is close enough that you fall asleep to it. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened to me, because if you don't understand this part, none of the rest will make sense. I am not a religious woman. I am a Muslim woman, raised on the Quran the way my mother raised me. But for 11 years, I had not really prayed. I had gone through the motions on Fridays out of respect for my mother. And that was all. The last thing I have ever truly been, with everything I have in me, is Farah's mother. I say that first because you need to know who is talking to you before I tell you what I saw. I'm recording this on June the 11th, 3 days after. I'm in my cousin's living room in General Santos City on a borrowed mattress on the floor with a garbage bag of donated clothes in the corner because everything I packed for this trip is under a collapsed house 40 minutes from here. Every so often the floor still moves, a small aftershock, one of hundreds by now, the kind I wouldn't have felt 3 days ago. And every time it moves, I stand up without meaning to, arms already reaching for where Farah would be if Farah were here. My cousin tells me to sit, to breathe. I can't. My body moves before my mind does now. I'm recording this alone on my phone because I have something I need to say, and I don't know another way to say it, and because there are people still under the rubble of this island tonight while I'm talking. And I need someone to know what I know. I've never spoken to a camera before. Forgive me if I do this wrong. I'm a woman who learned to talk quietly so I wouldn't wake up my daughter. I was born in 1987 in a wooden house up on stilts near the water, 3 streets from where my mother still lives. My father, Haji Banzil, drove a passenger jeepney on the route between Masim and General Santos, 26 years on the same road, the same potholes, the same stretch of coast every single day. He was a quiet man who smelled of diesel and menthol candy. My mother, Zahara, sewed for half the barangay on an old pedal machine that had belonged to her own mother, and if I close my eyes I can still hear it, that steady clatter in the middle of the night, because she sewed after we went to sleep so she could deliver everything early in the morning. I grew up between the smell of new cloth and the smell of engine oil, between a woman who talked to Allah while she worked and a man who barely talked at all. For a long time, I thought I would have to grow into one of them. I didn't. I grew into myself, which is the hardest thing to become when nobody has taught you how. We didn't have much money growing up, but we never went without rice, and my mother always found a way to have something sweet for us on Eid, even in the leanest years. I remember the whole barangay smelling like fried banana and coconut on those mornings. Everyone's front doors open, children running between houses in new clothes their mothers had stayed up sewing. I remember believing, as a child, that this was simply how the world worked, that faith and community and food were the same warm thing, inseparable from each other. It took years for that warmth to cool the way it did. My mother prayed 5 times a day without fail, and in the evenings she would sit with her tasbih, the prayer beads worn smooth from years of use, moving through the names quietly. I would lie in my bed and listen to that murmur rising and falling like water. My name folded somewhere into it. My father's name, the neighbors, the dead. She prayed the way she sewed, with her whole attention, certain that someone on the other side of it was listening, certain the work would be delivered on time. I loved her for it the way you love someone for a habit you've decided is beautiful and harmless. I did not believe it did anything. Even as a child, I kept my own private ledger, what people asked for in one column, what actually happened in the other, and the two never matched, no matter how hard the grown-ups swore they would. I need to tell you honestly why I stopped believing, because nothing that comes after makes sense without it. I didn't lose my faith all at once the way some people describe it. Mine went slowly, the way water gets into a wall you can't see, until one day you touch it and your hand sinks through and you realize it had been rotting for years. I made my own religious milestones as a girl the normal way, and I remember feeling something real, warm, in my chest during Ramadan nights at the mosque with my mother, and I thought that feeling was permanent. It wasn't. Life spent years quietly draining it, one small disappointment at a time. My father died when I was 22. A heart attack behind the wheel of his jeepney, halfway up the same hill he'd driven for 26 years, a vehicle full of passengers behind him. He managed to steer the jeepney onto the shoulder before he went. That was the last thing he did with his body, not saving himself, keeping strangers safe on a road he knew better than his own hands. I have carried that image my whole life, my father dying with his hands still protecting other people. I prayed that night the way my mother taught me, on my knees truly, asking Allah to give him back to me, even for a minute, even long enough to say one thing I never said to him. He didn't come back. What I learned instead is something life kept teaching me over and over. You ask with everything you have, and the answer is a closed door and your mother sewing in morning at 4 in the morning. But that isn't what finally closed the door for good. That was Farah. I moved to Canada when I was 27 through the caregiver program, cleaning houses and looking after an elderly couple in Winnipeg for almost 4 years before I earned my permanent residency. Those first years were harder than I ever let my mother know over the phone. I lived in a basement room with 2 other Filipina women I barely knew, working 6 days a week, sending almost every paycheck home, learning a whole new way of being cold that Mindanao had never prepared me for. I told my mother everything was fine every single time she called, because that is what daughters do, and because some part of me still believed that if I said it was fine enough times, it would become true. I met Farah's father, Rashid, at a Filipino community gathering not long after I finally got my permanent residency. He was kind in the beginning, in the way that's easy to be kind when nothing has gone wrong yet. He painted the nursery himself. He sanded a second-hand crib until it was smooth as glass. Then Farah was born, and the delivery went wrong in a way the doctors still can't fully explain to me. There were minutes the doctors counted afterward, and I never could. Minutes where my daughter didn't breathe when she was supposed to breathe. Out of those minutes came the Farah who is mine. Cerebral palsy, they told us when she was about a year and a half old. Once it became clear, she would not sit up when other babies sit up, or walk when they walk, or speak the way other children speak. Rashid stayed 2 more years. Then one night, he said he was going out for cigarettes. You already know how that sentence ends. I won't tell it. That was when I closed the door on God. And this time I bolted it, because I had only ever asked Allah for one thing in my whole life, with the force my mother used when she prayed. A healthy daughter. I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask for a husband who would stay. I asked that my daughter breathe when it was her turn to breathe, and the answer was 3 minutes without air and a man who left to buy cigarettes and never came home. After that, I didn't hate God. You can't hate something you've decided isn't there. I simply stopped counting on him, the way you stop counting on someone who promised to come and never does. I still went to the mosque sometimes, moving my mouth through the motions for my mother's sake while she was still alive, nothing moving underneath. People in our community would tell me, Allah gave me Farah because I was strong enough to carry her, because only special mothers get children like mine. I would smile and swallow it. Inside I was thinking, if this is a gift, please don't give anyone else a gift like this ever again. Let me tell you about my life in numbers, because numbers are the one thing I have always known how to count honestly. We lived on the 3rd floor of an old walk-up on Winnipeg's west side, an elevator that broke down when Farah was 4, and the building never had the money to fix. 42 steps from the sidewalk to my door. I counted them so many times I could tell you the number in my sleep even now. Farah weighed 26 kilograms by the time she was 9. I weigh 53. Do the math yourself on what it means to carry 26 kilograms of your own child up. 42 steps, 2 and 3 times a day, for 6 straight years. Because the elevator never got fixed and the world was never built for my daughter. Nobody needs to explain faith to me. I climbed those stairs every single day. That was my religion, my daughter's body against my chest and the counting of the steps under my breath, 1, 2, 3, all the way to the top, so she would be safe. I cleaned houses for a living, 3 regular clients through the week, and Mrs. Halvorsen, who had me on Wednesdays, always let me leave early on therapy days, because Farah had physiotherapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays at a clinic across the city. That meant 2 bus transfers each way with a folding wheelchair that weighed more than it looked like it should, which I would carry down first, leave at the bottom, and then climb back up for Farah. My whole life was that motion. Carry one thing down, climb back up for the other. Never leave my daughter alone at the top. People think the word sacrifice sounds beautiful. The word sacrifice is 42 steps with 26 kilograms in your arms when your back is already screaming and you still have 2 more houses to clean that day. But I need to tell you the whole truth, because I came here to tell the truth, and I already cheated God enough for 1 lifetime. Farah was never my cross to bear. That's the part people never understand. The part I didn't understand myself until I almost lost her. My daughter can't walk, but she dances with her eyes. My daughter doesn't speak in words, but she has a way of looking at me when I walk into a room that means more than any speech anyone has ever given me. And she has her rhythm. Since she was a baby, whenever I sang to her, a small lullaby my own mother used to hum, Farah would tap her hand, slow and deliberate, on whatever was nearest her, the table, my chest, the armrest of her wheelchair. 3 taps, then a pause. 3 taps, then a pause. It was her way of singing along with me. It was the one thing in this entire world that belonged only to the 2 of us and nobody else. Remember those 3 taps. You'll understand soon why I'm asking you to hold on to them. My mother had been asking me for 2 years to bring Farah home to Mindanao, to meet the family, to see the water our people have always lived beside. My mother is 74 now, and her health had started slipping, and something in me knew, the way you know things you don't want to admit you know, that if I waited much longer there might not be another chance. So in May, I finally said yes. I used almost every dollar of savings I had for the 2 of us to fly to General Santos, and from there, a cousin drove us the rest of the way to the barangay outside Masim, where I grew up, to my mother's house, the same wooden house on stilts, repainted a few times since, but still standing exactly where it always stood. Being back there did something strange to me that I hadn't expected. I thought going home would feel like home. Instead, I felt like a visitor in my own birthplace, a Canadian in the body of a Filipina, my Magindanaon getting rusty in my own mouth, my daughter a stranger to a country that was supposed to be half hers by blood. My mother adored Farah instantly and completely, the way grandmothers do, learning her rhythm within a day, tapping it back to her on the kitchen table until Farah laughed the way she laughs from somewhere deep down. A neighbor, an elderly widow named Bai Norhaya, who had raised 6 children of her own on that same street, started coming by every morning to help me with Farah while I visited relatives. And Farah loved her instantly too. In that unguarded way she loves people who take the time to actually look at her. I want you to remember Bai Norhaya's name because she matters for what comes later, and I don't want her to get lost among all the numbers. In the days before the 8th, I'd started noticing small things I brushed off at the time and only make sense to me now, looking back. 2 nights before, I woke up at 3 in the morning from a dream I couldn't fully remember, except for one detail: the sound of my mother's sewing machine running by itself in an empty room, faster and faster, with nobody's foot on the pedal. I lay awake after that dream for almost an hour, unsettled in a way I couldn't explain to myself, and told nobody about it the next morning because it seemed like nothing, the kind of dream you have when you're tired and far from your own bed. The morning of June the 8th started ordinary, in every way a morning can start. I was up before 6 because Farah still needs help each morning, no matter what country we're in. I had her dressed and fed by 7, sitting in her wheelchair near the open kitchen window while my mother made rice porridge on the stove, the smell of it filling that small wooden house the way it always had when I was a girl. Bai Norhaya had come by to sit with us before I went to help my cousin with something in town. Farah was tapping the armrest of her chair, 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, and I was humming the lullaby back to her while I packed my bag for the day. My mother laughed at something Bai Norhaya said. "That is the last full, ordinary minute of my old life, and I didn't know I needed to hold on to it, because you never know, until afterward, which minute was the one you should have grabbed with both hands." The Philippines does not have a public early warning system that alerts people seconds before an earthquake, the way some countries do. I want you to sit with that for a moment. A country built directly on top of one of the most active fault systems on the planet. And there is no siren, no alert on the radio, nothing that tells you what's coming before it arrives. There was no warning that morning. None. My phone was charging in the other room. Even if it had buzzed, I wouldn't have heard it over the stove and the two of us laughing. At 7:37 it hit. It wasn't like the movies. There was no low rumble building up first. The floor simply slammed upward once, a single brutal shove, as though something enormous had struck the ground from underneath, and then everything started moving wrong, all at once, in ways nothing is supposed to move. The kitchen window didn't rattle in its frame, it popped straight out of it. My mother's rice pot went flying off the stove. The old wooden beams of that house, which had survived storms my whole childhood, started groaning in a way I had never once heard them groan. That sound, the sound of that house, complaining under a weight it wasn't built to hold, is what snapped me out of the first half second of shock and sent me straight toward Farah. I got to her chair and pulled her against my chest before I even knew I was moving. She didn't cry. Farah almost never cries, but she made a sound I had never heard from her before, low and animal and terrified, and her fingers dug into my shoulder with a strength I didn't know she had. Bainurhaya was shouting something behind me. My mother was shouting from the kitchen doorway, and I was moving toward the front steps with Farah locked against my chest, thinking only, get her down, get her off these stilts, get her onto the ground. I had one foot on the top step when the second wave hit, worse than the first, the true magnitude 7.8 tearing loose beneath us. The stilts under that house, which had held through 50 years of typhoons, gave out from one side all at once. I felt the whole floor tilt beneath my feet, like something alive trying to throw us off its back. I grabbed the doorframe with one arm and held Farah with the other. With everything 6 years of carrying her up 42 steps had built into my body, and I swore to myself out loud in my own head that I would not let go of my daughter no matter what came down on top of us. The world came down anyway. A support beam gave way above the doorway. I remember a sound that hit my body before it reached my ears, a crack that went through my teeth and my ribs at the same time, and something enormous struck me from the side and knocked the air and the ground and my daughter out of my arms in the same instant. When it stopped, and people later told me the whole thing lasted less than a minute, though it felt like the entire rest of my life folded into that minute, I was lying face down across broken wood and concrete that used to be my mother's house, dust filling my mouth, a pain in my ribs I couldn't process yet, screaming a name. My arms were empty. Farah, who weighed 26 kilograms, who I had sworn with my whole body I would not let go of, who had her fingers in my shoulder 1 second earlier, was gone from my arms. She was underneath. Somewhere in that smoking pile of what used to be the house I grew up in, my daughter, who cannot walk, who cannot call out for help the way other children can, was buried, and I was standing above her in the dust with my hands empty, just beginning to understand what waiting was about to feel like. Amina had just lost her daughter into the wreckage of the house she grew up in, screaming a name into the dust with her arms suddenly, terribly empty. What comes next is the center of everything she has to tell you. The hours she waited at the edge of the rubble, and what she says happened when she had nothing left, not even her voice. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you something honest. Where are you right now hearing this? What time is it in your part of the world? I think about the fact that somebody, somewhere completely different from where I am, is hearing this at the exact hour they needed to hear it. If that's you tonight, tell me your city in the comments. I read every single one. I don't know how long I stood on top of that pile of wreckage screaming her name before someone pulled me off it. That part of the morning is torn in my memory, like a piece of tape someone cut with scissors. I know I screamed until my voice gave out. I know I clawed at broken wood with my bare hands piece by piece, and that a neighbor, a man I never saw the face of clearly and never learned the name of, grabbed me around the waist and hauled me backward, shouting into my ear that I would kill her, that the pile could shift, that if I kept pulling at it the wrong way, the whole thing could come down further on whoever was still alive underneath. That word stopped me. Alive underneath. If I kept clawing, I might crush my own daughter. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, harder than carrying her up 42 steps for 6 years, harder than giving birth to her. I stepped back from the wreckage where my daughter was buried, and I made myself wait. The rescue teams didn't reach our barangay until well into the afternoon. There was no electricity anywhere. Whole villages along that coast were shouting the same way at the same time, and there simply weren't enough rescuers in the world for that much need at once. The man in charge of the small crew that finally arrived, an older responder with a calm that I hated in that moment and understand completely now, explained to me with technical words I only half absorbed that they couldn't simply dig. The structure was unstable. They needed to shore it up first, driving wooden and metal supports underneath the collapsed sections so the weight wouldn't shift and crush any pocket of air that might still exist below, any pocket where someone might still be breathing. He explained it in plain, careful language, and all I understood was this. To save my daughter, they first had to move slowly, and every slow minute was a minute Farah's air might be running out. I want to tell you what it is to wait like that, because almost nobody who hasn't done it can understand it. It is not like waiting in a line. It is not like waiting for test results. It is standing at the edge of a pile of broken concrete where the only reason your life has ever mattered is buried somewhere beneath it, listening to strangers hammer wood into the dark, knowing your daughter is close enough that you could reach her if the world were fair, and being able to do absolutely nothing about it. The hours blurred together in a way I still can't fully separate. At some point, someone put a bottle of water in my hand, and I don't remember drinking from it, though it was empty by the time I noticed it again. At some point, the aftershocks started, small ones at first, and every single one sent a fresh wave of terror through me, because I kept picturing that unstable pile shifting further, closing whatever small pocket of air my daughter might still have. Somewhere down the coast, I learned later, a mountain village had lost 13 people to a landslide that same afternoon, and every time the ground trembled beneath my own feet, I thought of those families too. Thought of how many of us across that island were standing exactly where I was standing, listening for the same impossible sound. I prayed. I need to tell you that, honestly, because I bolted that door years ago and swore I was done. That afternoon I knelt in the dust and I prayed, but not the way my mother prayed. I didn't pray beautifully. I screamed at God. I said, "You already took my father from me. You gave me a daughter broken from her first minutes of breathing, and I carried that without ever once blaming you for it. I climbed 42 steps a day for 6 years without asking you for anything back. Not this one. not her. If you are real, if you are actually there the way my mother always swore you were, bring her back to me. And if you don't, then I was right this whole time, and there is nobody listening at all. It wasn't a prayer, it was a threat. It was the only thing I had left. It was close to midnight when the rescue crew finished shoring up one section and began threading a thermal camera through a small gap between the collapsed beams, searching for body heat, any sign that someone below was still alive to be found. I was sitting on a chunk of broken concrete by then, wrapped in a jacket a young volunteer had given me, exhausted in a way I didn't know a body could be exhausted. The dust on my face turned to mud from crying. Somewhere in those hours I stopped feeling my legs, stopped feeling the cold, stopped feeling almost everything, and slid into something that wasn't sleep and wasn't quite waking either. And that is when there was light. I have to be careful here, because I've watched people's faces change when I get to this part of the story over these last 3 days, and I don't blame them. 3 days ago, I would have looked at me the same way. So let me tell you slowly, exactly as it happened, without dressing it up. There was light, but it didn't come from the rescue crew's flashlights or the emergency vehicle's headlights or the sky, which was black and starless from all the dust still hanging in the air. The light came from my left side, from a direction where there was nothing that could have produced light, and it wasn't a light falling onto something. It was a light coming from someone. There was a person sitting beside me in the dust, at the edge of the wreckage, where a second earlier there had been no one at all. I never saw his face straight on. I want to be exact about that, because the truth matters here and I have no reason left to lie to anybody. The whole time he was with me, I never once looked directly into his face, the way you can't look straight into the sun. I saw him from the side, in the glow that fell across my own filthy hands. He was barefoot. That was the first thing I noticed, and it made no sense at all, because the ground around us was nothing but broken glass and twisted metal and shattered concrete. My own hands were cut open just from touching it, and he sat there on top of it, barefoot, as if it were warm sand under his feet. His hair was dark, his beard short, and his face wasn't the pale European face from paintings my Christian co-workers keep in their homes back in Winnipeg. It was a face that could have belonged to any man from that part of the world, from that same stretch of sun-worn coast. His hands rested open on his knees, turned slightly toward me, and on the inside of each wrist there was an old scar, healed wrong, about the width of a nail. I don't know much about wounds, but I knew what that was, and I knew that most people don't survive a wound like that at all. I won't try to describe his eyes to you properly, because I don't have the words, and the little I did see out of the corner of my own eye is already more than I can fit into language. I will only tell you they were dark, and that there was something in them that I have spent 3 days trying to name and still can't, and that somewhere in looking at them, even sideways, I stopped being afraid. He said my name before anything else. He said, Amina. And he said it the way my own mother says it, with the accent of home folded into it, the music of Mindanao inside my own name, not the flattened way people say it in Winnipeg, not a stranger guessing at how to pronounce it. He said it the way you say the name of someone you have known since before they were born, someone you are not guessing about at all. I fought him. I need to tell you that too, because it's the most honest thing I can give you about myself. The first thing I did with the impossible sitting beside me was argue. I told him in a voice cracked down to almost nothing that I did not believe in him. I told him I had prayed my whole life and gotten nothing back for it. I threw my father at him, my husband walking out for cigarettes, the 3 minutes Farah didn't breathe when she was born, the 42 steps, the 6 years. I asked him where he had been for any of it. He didn't argue back. He didn't tell me everything happens for a reason, or that my daughter was a gift, or any of the things people back home say that make me want to leave the room. He simply listened with the same full attention my mother gives when she prays, until there was nothing left in me to throw at him. And in the silence where my anger had been, he told me his name. He said, "My name is Isa. You may also know me as Jesus." I went still. Every part of me went still. Not from fear anymore, something past fear, something I still don't have the right word for even now. Jesus, sitting barefoot on broken glass beside a Muslim mother from Mindanao, in the middle of the worst night of her life, saying his own name the way you'd tell someone your name at a bus stop. Plain, unhurried, certain. I told him too that I already knew who the Quran said he was. A prophet, born of Maryam without a father, honored above almost every other messenger, one who healed the sick and spoke as an infant to defend his mother's honor, one who will return before the end of all things. I told him I had been raised to respect him deeply and never once to imagine him sitting barefoot beside me in the dark, claiming to be more than that. Jesus didn't dispute a word of what I'd been taught. He told me gently that he hadn't come to erase any of it, only to show me there was more to the story than I had been given room to imagine. Jesus said, "You have spent your whole life measuring whether prayers get answered the way you ask for them. Tonight isn't about winning that argument. Tonight is about your daughter and about whether you'll let this door stay open instead of bolting it again once the sun comes up." He told me where Farah was. I'll give you his words as close as my broken memory can hold them. He said, "Farah is alive. She is breathing. They are not looking where she is." Then he gave me something practical, something of this world entirely, the way one builder gives directions to another. He said, where the kitchen met the front room, the roof beam came down at an angle and wedged against the stove. Underneath that, there's a pocket of open space. Farah is on the left side of it, against the same wall she was sitting near this morning. Tell them to dig there, not where the machine is pointing. 3 meters to the left, toward where your mother's kitchen stood. And then he said one more thing that broke something open in me. He said, "You will hear her, the way she knows how to call you." I got to my feet without knowing how my legs still worked. I grabbed the arm of the man in charge, the older responder with the maddening calm, and I told him they were digging in the wrong place. I told him my daughter was 3 meters to the left, underneath a beam wedged against the stove, on the left wall of what had been the kitchen. He looked at me with the exact patience that makes you want to scream at a person, and told me gently that the thermal imaging had already swept that section, that it read cold, empty, that a living body shows heat on that screen and there was none there, that he understood my pain, but they had to follow where the equipment told them to dig, not where a grieving mother's hand was pointing. He had an entire province of people dying that night, and a machine telling him that patch of rubble was a grave, not a rescue. I didn't move. I told him, "Dig there." I said it with a certainty that wasn't mine, that I have no way of having on my own, a certainty that came from Jesus, who was still sitting barefoot at the edge of the wreckage where the responder could not see him. I said, "Please, 3 meters to the left where the kitchen stood, and that man." God knows why, he still doesn't know why himself, he told me so later. Called off the thermal search in that spot and sent 3 of his crew to open ground exactly where I was pointing. Here is the part I cannot explain, the part that makes people look away from me, the part I wouldn't believe either if someone else told it to me. About 20 minutes into digging in, the place the machine swore was empty. One of the crew suddenly threw up a hand and told everyone to go silent. "Listen," he said. And in that silence, from somewhere underneath the collapsed beam wedged against the stove, a sound came up through the concrete. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. A pause. It was Farah's rhythm. It was our lullaby, the one thing in this entire world that belonged only to the 2 of us. My daughter, who cannot call out for help the way other children can, was calling for me the only way she has ever known how, tapping her hand against whatever was closest to her in the dark, and I was standing above her, hearing it with my own ears. The man who heard it first put that detail in his official report. He's a real man with a real name attached to that document, and I won't share it here without asking him first, but he cried while they kept digging. And he told me later he had 30 years in emergency response and had never once heard anything like it. They pulled Farah out of that hole on the left side of the kitchen. 3 meters from where the machine swore, there was nothing but cold concrete. I have neighbors back in Winnipeg, kind people, who have tried gently to explain this away since I got home. Exhaustion does strange things to the mind, they tell me. A mother about to lose her only child can convince herself of almost anything under that kind of pressure. I understand why they say it, because for 39 years I was the one saying it to other people. But my exhausted mind didn't know that our kitchen faced left instead of right. My desperate mind couldn't have moved a roof beam in my head until it wedged against a stove I hadn't looked at in 11 years. And whatever comfort my mind supposedly invented for itself ended up written into an emergency responder's official report as 3 meters to the left of a reading that said, empty. I don't understand thermal imaging equipment. I understand when something leaves a mark on the actual world, a mark other people can see and sign their names to. This left one. There was a young volunteer who stayed near me for most of that night before any of this happened, refilling my water, checking on me every so often without pushing me to talk. Her name was Grace, a nursing student from a Catholic university in Davao who had come down with a church relief group as soon as the roads reopened. At one point, she sat beside me in the dust and told me quietly that she'd lost her own younger brother to dengue fever 3 years earlier, and that she still didn't understand why her prayers for him hadn't been answered the way she'd asked. I remember thinking, even in the middle of my own terror, that grief doesn't care what faith you were raised with. It finds the same hollow place in everyone. When she saw me again the next morning, after Farah had been pulled from the wreckage, she didn't ask me a single question about what I'd experienced in the dark. She just held both of Farah's small hands and cried with me, the way you cry alongside someone whose language for faith is different from your own, but whose relief is the exact same shape as yours. What I felt in the moment before they placed Farah back in my arms, I won't let anyone take away from me with a tidy explanation, because it happened inside my own body, and my body is the one thing that has always truly belonged to me. Before I even touched her, a warmth moved up through my chest, and something lifted off me, something specific, the exact weight I had been carrying since I was 22 years old, since my father's jeepney, since the 3 minutes Farah didn't breathe. The weight of everything I had ever demanded from God lifted off my shoulders all at once, the way your whole body straightens once you finally set Farah down at the top of those 42 steps after climbing them with everything you have left. I didn't decide to believe. I'm not even certain belief is the right word for it. Something was taken off me that I hadn't known a person could carry, and I have not been able to put it back on since, though God knows I have tried because it would be easier. That first night in the evacuation shelter, a volunteer chaplain making his way from family to family, wearing a donated vest with a small cross pinned to it, found me shaking and couldn't get a single word out of me. Instead of talking, he opened a small worn Bible and read me a story about a man named Jairus, whose 12-year-old daughter was dying and who went looking for Jesus to save her. On the way, someone told him not to bother the teacher anymore because the girl had already died. Jesus told him not to be afraid, only to believe. And when they reached the house, everyone was weeping, and he said the girl was not dead, only sleeping. People laughed at him because they knew she was dead. He went in anyway, took her by the hand, and told her to get up. And she stood up. I asked him to read it to me twice because I had been standing at the edge of a pile of concrete where everyone, even the machine, said there was nothing left, cold, empty, a grave, and a voice had told me my daughter wasn't gone, that she was there, sleeping in the dark, and to go find her 3 meters to the left. I have to tell you what this cost, because anyone who tells a story like this without telling you the cost is lying, and I already lied to God enough for one lifetime. Farah is alive. Her left leg is broken in 2 places and one of her hands was crushed under debris, and she is going to need surgeries I don't yet know how I will pay for. She will likely be afraid of small enclosed spaces for the rest of her life, and when the aftershocks come now, she presses herself against me and makes that same animal sound I heard for the first time that morning. But she is alive. And while I was holding her in the ambulance by Norhaya, our elderly neighbor, the widow who came every morning to tap Farah's rhythm back to her on the kitchen table, did not make it out of that house. She was 81, and she had opened her own front door trying to help us get out when the second wave hit, and she never got clear of the wreckage. If she hadn't stopped to help us, maybe. I will never be able to close that account. It is the question that eats at me even now. Why my daughter, and not the woman who spent her last morning learning how my daughter sings? I asked the volunteer chaplain that question directly, the same question every survivor eventually asks. Why me? Why her and not the woman who prayed her whole life without ever once doubting it? He didn't pretend to have an answer, and I respected him more for that than for anything he could have made up. He told me he stopped trying to do God's math a long time ago because it never balanced the way he expected. All he was certain of was that the voice had called my name first, before I had done a single thing to deserve it, before I believed, before I behaved. Only my name, in the dark, in my father's accent, at a door I had bolted shut 11 years earlier, now simply open, with light coming through it whether I had chosen that or not. He also told me something I didn't expect from a Catholic volunteer working a Muslim family's disaster. He said he didn't need me to convert to anything before he'd sit with me in my grief, and that whatever name I eventually gave to what happened in that dust, the God he served didn't require me to get the paperwork right before showing up for my daughter. Amina had just lost the woman who cared for her daughter like family, holding her survival and someone else's death in the same trembling hands. Before we go further, I want to pause the story here because I know some of you are carrying your own version of what she was carrying that week. Maybe it isn't an earthquake. Maybe it's a diagnosis or a marriage that fell apart or a child you're terrified for. If that's you right now, do one thing before we keep going. Subscribe and leave one word in the comments describing what you need a sign about tonight. I read every single one and I pray over them. I'm back in Winnipeg now, 5 weeks later, in the same third-floor walk-up with the same 42 steps and the same elevator that still doesn't work. Farah is home from the hospital in Manila where they operated on her leg in a cast that will come off in another month, and she still flinches at loud sounds in a way she never used to before. I still pray every single day more than I ever did before that morning, though the words I use now are different from the ones my mother taught me, and I'm still learning how to pray them. The flight home was almost unbearable. 14 hours with a daughter in a cast, both of us jumping at every small vibration of the plane, my hands shaking every time the seatbelt sign lit up. When we finally landed and I wheeled Farah out through arrivals, half our small Filipino community in Winnipeg was waiting for us at the gate. People I clean houses beside, people from the mosque, people who had only known us as the quiet mother and her daughter in apartment 304. Mrs. Halvorsen was there too, my Wednesday client, holding a homemade casserole like it was the only language she had for what she wanted to say. Nobody asked me for details that day. They just held Farah's hands one after another and told her they were glad she came home. Not everyone in my life has taken this well, and I want to be honest about that instead of pretending my story landed easily. Some of the women I've prayed beside for years look at me differently now, careful around me, unsure what box to put me in since I came home. My own imam here in Winnipeg sat with me for almost 2 hours the week I got back, listening without interrupting, and when I finished he told me gently that he couldn't walk the rest of this road with me, that what I was describing wasn't something Islam could hold inside itself, and that he respected me too much to pretend otherwise. I cried in his office. He wasn't cruel about it. He was honest, and honesty was exactly what I needed by then, because I had spent 3 weeks trying to fit Jesus into the shape of my old faith, and he simply doesn't fit there. He isn't a prophet who visited me that night. He told me his own name, and I believe him. My mother, when I finally told her everything, sitting with her in her rebuilt kitchen weeks later, didn't tell me I had lost my mind the way I feared she would. She went quiet for a long time, working her tasbih beads through her fingers the way she has my whole life, and then she told me she had been praying every single night since I left for Canada that Allah would find some way to reach me again, because she had watched the door in me close after Rashid left and never fully open again. When I told her the name he gave me, she went quiet again, longer this time. She didn't argue with me. She said she couldn't unknow her own daughter's face. And my face, she said, hadn't looked that peaceful since I was a girl sewing beside her on the floor. She said she needed time. I gave her that. I'm still giving it to her. I was baptized 4 weeks ago in a small church 2 blocks from my apartment building. The same 42 steps still between me and the street, though I don't carry them the same way anymore. Farah was there in her chair, tapping our rhythm against the armrest while the water ran over my head, and I thought about a barefoot man sitting beside me in the rubble of my mother's house, and about the fact that he had scars on his wrists a person shouldn't have survived, and about the fact that he found me anyway, 3 meters to the left of where the whole world said there was nothing left. I believe Jesus is who he told me he was that night. Not a prophet only, not a messenger only, the one who called my name before I had done a single thing to earn it, and who is still calling it. I know what that costs me here in my own community, and I'm not pretending it doesn't hurt. But I would rather lose comfort than lose the truth of what happened to me in that dark, and I am not going to spend the rest of my life pretending Jesus is smaller than what he showed me he is. Some nights, putting Farah to bed, I catch myself humming that same lullaby, and she still taps it back to me. 3 beats and a pause against the frame of her new bed. A little slower now because of the cast. But the rhythm is exactly the same rhythm it has always been. Every single time she does it, I think about a beam wedged against a stove on the other side of the world, and Jesus crouching in the dust beside me. And I think that rhythm was never just ours after all. It was heard because he was listening. Before I close this out, I want to say 3 things to 3 different people who might be watching tonight. To the mother sitting right now at the edge of her own pile of wreckage, listening to strangers work in the dark while her child is somewhere she cannot reach. Listen closely. Your child might be calling you in the only way they know how, quietly, in a rhythm only the 2 of you understand. Ask Jesus to show you where to dig, even when the machine says there's nothing there. To the mother of a child the world doesn't fully understand, a child you carry up your own version of 42 steps every single day, who bolted the door on God the way I did after one disappointment too many. I'm not here to shame you for that. I held that position longer than most people ever do. I'm only telling you that Jesus found me at the worst possible moment of my life, uninvited, unearned, and he can find you too, exactly where you are, without you cleaning yourself up first. And to anyone who has decided the only way to survive is to carry everything alone, up your own staircase, one step at a time, believing nobody is behind you. I carried my daughter for 6 years thinking I was doing it by myself. I wasn't alone. Jesus was in that stairwell with me the whole time, and I didn't understand that until I lost her for a few hours in the dark, and he told me exactly where to find her. If Jesus is real the way I now believe he is, then he is not far from you tonight either, wherever you're watching this from. Type the words "Jesus found me" in the comments if you believe that, even if you're not fully sure yet why you believe it. I read every single one, and I pray over them by name when I can. If this story moved something in you tonight, subscribe so that more people carrying their own version of that night can find their way to a story like mine and to the God who walked into it uninvited. And say a prayer for someone right now who feels like they're standing at the edge of their own pile of rubble, believing nothing underneath is left alive. Jesus already knows exactly where they are. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.